Hello and welcome to your first anatomy lesson. This anatomy lesson is going to look at all the different things that make up the human body in terms of structure. So we're going to look at the bones, the ligaments, the tendons, and also the muscles and the fascia. Each week, as we go through different parts of the human body, we'll be looking at specific areas in a little bit more detail. So you'll learn about each muscle and each tendon and each ligament around that area of the body. For today's lesson, we're looking at this as a whole. So sort of what is a bone? What comprises a bone? How is it made? How does it continue to thrive and be healthy? How does yoga help? And looking at the same thing with ligaments, tendons, muscles, and also fascia, the connective tissue. So in this lesson, it'll really be an overview of everything around the structure of the human body. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see a bunch of slides, a PowerPoint presentation that I put together on this. As we go through this together, I'll also be highlighting a few things that you'll have on a quiz that you will submit at the end of this lesson. So here, looking at the overview of bones, joints, muscles, tendons, and fascia. So for bones, and here's a skeleton, you may have also seen the skeleton behind us, or behind me. Typically, there's about 206 bones in the human skeleton. And that includes the tiniest little bone that's inside the middle ear to the longest bone, which is the femur. Let me see if I can highlight it here. The thigh bone. So that's the longest bone in the body. When you're born, so infants are typically born with about 270 bones. So lots more bones than adults. What happens is as we grow and we put more stress on the bones and joints and we move in different ways, some of those bones fuse together. And for the most part, it ends up being 206 separate bones. Why is it a little bit different for some people? Some people are actually born with extra bones or less bones, or they develop in different ways. But for the most part, we could say there's about 206 bones in the human body. So here's our skeletal system or skeletal system. You can say it either way. With a list of all of the different bones in the body. And as I said before, what we'll be doing as we go through each lesson, so you've got six sections. As we go through each of them, we'll be looking at each body part in a little bit more detail. But here's sort of the overview of those 206 bones. So what are bones? They're the body's main form of structural support. They're made of hard, strong tissue that gives your body the shape. So it's really the outer portion of the body and also protects the organs. And really important ones like the brain, so the skull supports and protects the brain. The heart, the ribs, the rib cage supports the heart inside. And as well as the spinal cord, the vertebrae of the spine protect the spinal cord. And why is the spinal cord so important? Because it communicates, gives information between the brain and the whole rest of the body. So the spinal cord is kind of like the super highway of information. Very important for it to be protected. So bones are made of cells and proteins. And the cortex, this is the outer layer, the bit that you'd sort of, you may see when you look at a skeleton, like the skeleton behind me. It's really strong and it's able to withstand a lot of pressure. So although bones do rarely break, we kind of have to apply quite a bit of force and in certain ways in order for those bones to break. For the most part, they function exceptionally well. And it takes so much pressure for those bones to break. Now, inside the bone is this more spongy bone. It's not as dense, so that means that because there aren't as many fibers and cells, it's a lot more porous, it's a lot more flexible. And inside here, you can see it contains the bone marrow and blood vessels. So it's really cool to think about bones. We might not think of this, that they are living tissue. There's lots going on inside, including blood vessels that supports blood flow throughout the whole body. And then there's the periosteum. So the periosteum is right on the outside. It's fibrous connective tissue, and connective tissue really just means that it's tissue that connects things to each other. Most of what we have inside the body is, in fact, connective tissue. But in the periosteum, we have blood vessels, but also nerves and lymphatic vessels that nourish the bone. So, when you hit yourself, maybe you hit your elbow, or I do this a lot. I kind of walk into the side of a doorway and you get that sharp oof pain. That's the periosteum, and that's because it's got so many nerves there. So it gives quite a bit of feedback, for example, pain feedback if it gets hit. The periosteum is super important because it plays a role in bone growth, repair, and healing. And what is bone growth? Well, bones are 1/3 living tissue. So we might think about that when we're young, or if you have young people in your life, you notice, gosh, they grow really quickly, especially in the first kind of like 12 years of their lives. But adults too have bones that are still 1/3 living tissue. And the way that that happens is these two different types of cells. We've got the osteoblasts that form new bone tissue. This is consistently happening all the time. And then osteoclasts, so they take away old bone tissue to make room for new and healthier tissue to replace it. Something you might have heard about, and we'll talk about much later on, is osteoporosis or low bone density. This typically happens to people in later life, most typically women in postmenopause, so after they cease to have their menstrual periods. And in that period of life, we have more osteoclasts doing work, so taking that bone away. And what we want to do in that period of life is do as much as we can to continue to build the bone and build bone density, get those osteoblasts working. Things like weight-bearing activity like yoga, standing poses is really helpful for that. So here the takeaway is bone is 1/3 living tissue. So the skeleton itself, we could categorize it into two different sections. So we have the axillar skeleton, so that's right in the center. And then we have the appendicular skeleton, the stuff on the outside. Let's take a look at that a little bit more. So the axial skeleton is the central bony structure. So it's the bones of the skull, so around our head, the vertebral column, so that means the vertebrae, it's the spine, and also the rib cage. So it's the main core, the center of the body. There's 80 bones. And so importantly, it protects the brain, so inside the skull, the spinal cord inside the vertebral column or the spine, and also the heart inside the rib cage and the lungs inside the rib cage. It also provides a central framework for the attachment of muscles and other bones. So our skeleton wouldn't be held upright unless we had a center, and this is the center. The center is the axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton, so the opposite, the stuff on the outside, is the upper and lower extremities. So we say the upper extremities like the arms, shoulders and arms, and the lower extremities, the pelvis and the legs. There's 126 bones in the appendicular skeleton. Okay, I'm going to move on to joints now. So joints are where two or more bones meet. So if we look at the skeleton, we can see, oh, up here is the shoulder joint. It's a ball and socket joint called the glenohumeral joint. Down here, we have the hinge joint of the knee. And over here, we have another ball and socket joint of the hip, where we have the femur or the thigh bone come into the hip socket or the acetabulum. So joints are made of bones and also the connective tissue that hold these joints together. So we have cartilage, tendons, ligaments, and nerves. I'll get into this a bit more now. So joints, most of them are mobile, and that allows the bones to move. So for example, if you were just to reach your arm up over your head and then bring it down, or extend your fingers out in your palm and then curl them in, these are mobile joints. They're also called synovial joints. And the reason they're called synovial joints is this fluid that exists inside of every single movable joint. Synovial joint is called synovial fluid. And synovial fluid is kind of like the oil that exists to lubricate the joint. In fact, in yoga, what we do so much, the beginning of our class warm-ups, the warm-ups are to warm up these movable joints. So for example, we do like cat-cow curls, spinal waves. We maybe roll out the feet or the ankles. We do movements with the shoulders really gently and the hips. And that's all to warm up these joints so that the synovial fluid can really oil the joint well. Now, there's some joints that don't move. So in adults, when we have our bones fuse in the skull, we've got these joints here. You can see these, so these sutures here, where these bones have come together. The joints that don't move, they're called fixed. Or we might have some joints that move a little, like the vertebrae. So here's a separate vertebrae, and here's all of them together. We'll talk about the vertebrae a lot more in the spinal anatomy module. So they move just a little bit. Now, here are bunches of different movable joints. I'm going to go through all of them. And this isn't necessarily for you to memorize and know all of the names of the different joints. That's not something that you're going to be tested on, but I do want you to know the different types of movable joints that exist. This is a really important one, ball and socket joints. So ball and socket joints, they're the shoulders and the hips. They allow all sorts of movement. So forward, backward, sideways, and rotational. So for example, here is our glenohumeral joint of the shoulder, lots of ligamentous structures, so strong connective tissue to keep it in place. And that allows us to do movements like this. Go ahead and take your fingers, elbows bent, fingers on the shoulders, and then you can just roll the arms around. This is the movement of a ball and socket joint. So rotational movement. Same thing with the hip. The femoral head, so this is the femur, remember that's the longest bone in the body. It's got a head on it, which is the ball that rests inside the acetabulum or the hip joint. And the same thing with our hips, we're able to do so many different movements, including rotational movement. The reason that the hips and the shoulders are ball and socket joints is because we demand so much movement from them. There is a difference between this ball and socket joint of the shoulder and the hips. And the main difference is that with the shoulder, it's a little bit of a more shallow joint, lots more ligamentous structure to keep it in place. That's because we do so much with our arms, like reaching and grabbing and pulling and tugging and twisting around. Whereas with the hips, we do less, say, 360-degree movement with the hips. And the reason for that is because we weight bear, we walk on the legs, which are connected to the hips. If it was the opposite way, if we like walked on our arms, we'd see the opposite thing. We'd have a deeper socket inside the shoulder in order to support the body weight. So that's why we have a deep socket of the hip, slightly more shallow socket of the shoulder. That allows the shoulder to be more mobile than the hip. And that's because we weight bear, because we walk on basically the hip joint. Now there's also hinge joints. So in the fingers, we've got hinge joints. We can sort of bend our fingers like this. The knees, bending the knees, like straightening legs and rebending. Elbows, extending the arm and then bending. And the toes. They only allow bending and straightening movements. So it's called a hinge because here's like a hinge at a door, for example. Only kind of open and close. That's all they do. Hinge joints only open and close. We've got a plane or gliding joint. They're a little flat, slightly curved, and they allow surfaces to slide over just a limited range of motion. So for example, there's a gliding joint here in the ankle that allows for the movement when you're walking to be able to step and roll the ankle forward and back. But also here we can see the spine. These are two vertebrae of the spine. This allows just a little movement, flexion or rounding forward or extension, going into a back bend. These joints we'll go into in a lot more detail when we go over the spine and also the ankle. There's also a saddle joint. So in the saddle joint, you can sort of like imagine being on a saddle, like in a horse, and they can move up and down and back and forth. There's only a few. We've got here in the hand, the saddle joint. There's also a little tiny bone inside your ear. And then also around the clavicle, the sternal clavicular joint. So that's the sternum, which is the very top of your in the front where the ribs come together, and then the clavicle or your collarbone. So not a whole lot of movement in these. We don't go over saddle joints very much in this course because they're not the major joints that we're talking about. There's also pivot joints. So pivot joints really important. The big one that we'll talk about in later modules is the neck. So if you were to move your head around, you can see this is pivoting. So rolling the head around in a little circle and from side to side. That is what allows that full range of movement of the neck. The neck is a really interesting joint around the pivot joint, so right around the base of the skull, top of the cervical spine, because we need so much movement for the head. If you think about how many times you're moving your head from side to side, even like if you're driving, if you're shoulder checking, or you hear a sound and all of a sudden you turn really quickly, or you look up, you look down. We need this movement here in that pivot joint. And then here we have condyloid or ellipsoidal joints. So the wrist joint does almost everything that the neck does if you kind of roll your wrist around, but it's not doing that full kind of rolling around over all the planes as the neck does. Okay, so those are the joints. So different types of joints we went over. The main ones that we'll go revisit: ball and socket, hinge joint, and then also pivot joint. Let's move on now to how it all works together. So the bones, the muscles, the joints, they work together in a coordinated way to give the body movement and also stability. And in yoga, we're constantly doing this balance between mobility and stability. And so we're thinking about, as we go through the asana and the sequencing and the therapeutic applications, how do we balance that with our clients? Mobility, so movement, and stability, keeping things in place. The ligaments are one of the main things that help keep the joints in place. The tendons, they connect muscle to bones, and they allow for movement. We'll talk about this a little bit more now. So the ligaments are short bands of very tough, flexible tissue. We have about 900 ligaments. They do a lot of work for us, and they connect two bones of a joint together. Here, for example, is the knee joint. Kind of difficult to see, but here's the patella or the kneecap. And there's the lower leg bones, the tibia and the fibia. So the tibia is the main one. Fibula is off to the side. And then we have the femur here, or that thigh bone. So these ligaments, and you may have had experience of your knee ligaments, for example, if you've had any knee injury, it's usually the ligaments that get hurt. These are super tough, super strong, and try their very best to keep the knees together. We do sometimes though get issues with the ligaments if we've had something like an injury, say you're playing soccer and someone comes and sort of hits you from the side. A lot of soccer players get ACL or anterior cruciate ligament issues, and that is exactly how that happens when they get sort of hit from the side. So ligaments connect bone to bone. They stabilize the joint or keep the ends of the joint together. So it ensures that the bones don't twist too much or move too far apart and become dislocated. So ligaments are really there to support that structure. For example, here's the ankle joint. So another one where you might have had an experience, if you roll over on your ankle, say stepping off a sidewalk or something and you roll off to the side, these ligaments here of the ankle might also get a little bit strained. But these are really firm straps, so they do their very, very best to keep the foot, the ankle in place. We'll talk more about the ligaments of the ankle when we go over the anatomy of the feet and the ankle. So the basic building blocks of the ligament, that's collagen fibers. They're really strong, flexible. They're also very resistant to damage from pulling, so from pulling a joint apart or from compression stressors, like somebody being pushed into it. And they're arranged in what's called parallel bundles, so like a rope. Um, and because, so here's like a little one, but then imagine each of these are composed of this. It makes the ligaments super, super strong. The way that they are designed, again, is for stability. Ligaments are there for stability. Some ligaments, although most of them connect bone to bone, some don't connect to bone, but instead they keep the internal organs in place. So here, for example, is a body who's grown a baby, and the baby's inside the uterus here. And here we have what's called the round ligament to help keep this uterus in place. We also have ligaments to keep the liver, intestine, and stomach in place as well. The reason that the ligaments are there is to keep those organs from bending, twisting, or tearing, which could be one, extremely painful if it happened, and two, quite injurious. It would mean that these organs wouldn't work anymore. So really, these ligaments that are holding these organs in place, doing very important work. So here's some examples. We've got lots of ligaments in the shoulder. And remember, the reason for that is the shoulder socket, the glenohumeral joint, is quite shallow. So it needs tons of super duper strong ligaments to keep the shoulder in place when we do these movements, like the sort of circumduction, which is just rolling around in a circle or reaching up or reaching way behind you. We need those strong shoulder ligaments to keep things in place. Same thing with the knees, as I spoke about before. If we're doing lots of running or other sports, for sure, we need these knee ligaments to keep the knee in place. And then here's some examples of the hip ligaments. Hip ligaments are also super duper strong, tough, and that is, again, to keep our hips in place. So with ligaments, we don't want to stretch them. We don't want to stretch our ligaments. Their whole job is to keep things in place. Some of us are kind of blessed with hypermobility. I joked when I said blessed there because hypermobility, although we often see it in yoga, like for example, here, I'm just going to stop my share for a sec. For example, for me, this body that I live in, I am a hypermobile body, which means my ligaments are pretty loose. That's just genetic. It's just the way that I was born into. And a lot of us that are hypermobile, that have those kind of loose ligaments, will self-select for yoga because so much of yoga is about flexibility. And so our job, and very much my work in the last 25 years of yoga that I've been practicing and teaching, has been to find stability for my joints. So remember, we're always looking at this balance of mobility, movement, and stability, keeping things in place. For a body like mine, and I'll show you some joints in a sec so you can see, I very much need to work on that stability place. So for example, I'm just going to stand up so you can see me. So my knees, for example, my knee joint, you'll see here, if I bend my knees back, can you see how they move way back? Like here is neutral, but my knees can go all the way back there. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time hanging out in that place with my knees behind me. One, it kind of messes with my posture, like rather than having a nice gentle lumbar curve and a really tall spine. As soon as I go into that, you might be able to see my pelvis tucks under, my belly comes forward, my shoulders roll a bit too far back. So that's one reason, posture. But the other reason is the wear and tear that happens on my joints. We don't want to hang out in that hypermobile place. And some of the alignment videos that you'll see, I also show about the elbows. So say we're on hands and knees in table position. Here is my elbow in a hypermobile place. So the pits of the elbow, you know, if you bend your arm, let's say this is the inside bit is the pit. The pits are moving forward when I'm in a hypermobile place. So I need to, and any of us who are hypermobile, need to work on bending the elbows a bit. So those pits, the insides face each other. So rather than here, sort of hanging out into the joint, we get a bit more stable here. So ligaments, they're there to keep our joints in place. But for those of us who have that blessing of hypermobility, and we see a lot of us in yoga because, again, we self-select because yoga really is a lot about mobility. So it's something that sometimes we can get into because we're like good at it because our bodies bend a lot. But then again, our job is to work on stability. Okay, I'm gonna go back to share my screen. Okay, so those are our ligaments. Yes, their job to keep things in place. So then we have tendons. So tendons, also a connective tissue, fibrous as well, super strong as well, but different because the tendon connects the muscle to bone. So ligament is bone to bone for stability. Tendon is muscle to bone, and it's a little bit more about mobility. It makes sure that the muscles work really well to keep those joints mobile. So most of them will be a muscle to a bone, but there is a few that are different. Like for example, there's tendons that connect the eyeballs inside the head as well. There's about 4,000 tendons in the adult human body, so lots. So the tendons, their job is to help prevent muscle injury by absorbing some of the impact that the muscles take when you do something that has impact, like running or jumping, that kind of high impact on the body. So here's one, for example, when we're running or jumping, we have this super duper strong, large tendon called the Achilles tendon that you might have heard of before. The Achilles tendon connects the calf muscle. So here, our calf muscle, this is our gastroc muscle, to the heel bone down here. And the reason why it's so strong and big and wide is exactly for that reason, for that running and jumping to absorb that impact. Now, when you contract a muscle like make it work, the tendon pulls that attached bone, letting it move. So it's a whole communication system. The tendons work as levers to pull the bones as the muscles contract and relax. So as they alternately contract and relax. Tendons are stiffer than muscles and they have more strength. It's because they're denser. For instance, the flexor tendons in your foot, so the flexor tendons here in the foot, they can handle 8 more times your body weight. So 8 times your body weight, which is pretty awesome. And the reason is again for that impact. So when we're running, jumping, dancing, jumping forward in a sun salutation, we need the body to be able to absorb all of that weight. So tendons work for mobility. They allow those joints to move. different from ligaments that's all about stability. Now, the other thing about tendons is, so they're mostly collagen also, but they do also contain blood vessels and nerves. So there's lots of information in there. Um, the collagen fibers, for the most part, they're really flexible, they're strong, they're resistant to damage. And the tendon structure, this is familiar, also similar to a fiber optic cable or a rope. So we've got bundles again. The bundling of the fibers inside, the collagen fibers, reinforces that tendon, makes it stronger. So it's really strong, it's really dense, it's stronger, denser than muscle, but it also has a little less blood supply than muscle. So if a tendon gets damaged, it takes a little while longer for it to heal compared to a muscle. So here's some examples. We've got tendons in the rotator cuff. For so many folks, injuries of the shoulder come from the rotator cuff. We'll talk about it as we get to our module where we look at shoulder anatomy. But the rotator cuff muscle, it's a group of four muscles, and they do all this kind of stuff. So I've got, again, my fingertips on my shoulder, elbow bent, and rolling my arm around. Those rotator cuff muscles are responsible for movement, for rotation. Here's another one, the hamstrings. So the hamstring connects, these muscles connect from the knee up to the sitting bone. And what can sometimes happen if we stretch or have too much impact on it, it'll tear as well. So this is just giving an example of a pretty bad tear that would take a little while for it to heal. Remembering that because these tendons are so strong, less blood flow, takes a little longer for it to heal. Rest is the first thing to do with a tendon tear. Okay, let's take a look at muscles now. So I've referred to them already, but let's take a look and see what they actually are. There's a lot of them, 639 in the human body. And why is it about? It's because, again, some people have more or less things just based on their genetics. There's three different types of muscle. Now, the most talked about is the skeletal muscle, and that's something like a bicep, like anything that moves. We also have smooth muscles. Those are our organs. And we have cardiac muscle. It's a really specific tissue that's for the heart. So the brain nerves and skeletal muscles, they work together to cause movement, and that's collectively known as the neuromuscular system. So neuro, brain and nerves, muscular, muscles system, neuromuscular system. So the muscles get information from the brain via the nerves to move. And then they also send information back to the brain. It's a two-way communication system. So the skeletal muscle, it's specialized tissue that's attached to bones and allows movement. Together, the skeletal muscles and bones, that's called the musculoskeletal system. So the muscles and the bones together, muscular skeletal system. Skeletal muscles often grouped into opposing pairs, so like biceps, front of the arm, and triceps, back of the arm. The skeletal muscles are under our conscious control. So whether or not we're consciously thinking about it, anytime we move our body in any way, whether that's our face, our breath, or our arms and legs, it is conscious control. So it's messages coming from brain via the nervous system to the muscles and then back again. So they play an essential role in breathing, in facial expressions, in eye movements, and they also help us maintain posture and balance. Skeletal muscles are constantly working, even if we're not thinking about it. That communication is always happening within our body. And they're continually making fine adjustments. So even here, while you're probably sat watching this, your muscles are working to keep you upright. Even if you don't move around a lot, those muscles are making little fine-tune adjustments always. They also, these skeletal muscles, they protect the vital organs. So they're like extra padding around the vital organs. So those skeletal muscles, they control the tendons, the ligaments, and the bones of the muscular skeletal system. Remembering here, there are skeletal muscles. They're attached to the bones by the tendons, that strong fibrous tissue. So another term for skeletal muscles is striated. Striated. And that's because if you look at the tissue under a microscope, it's like little stripes. Here you can see these little stripes. So they're arranged in striated patterns to form bands. They'll look like little bands. And within the skeletal muscles, we have the fundamental unit of contraction known as a sarcomere. So a sarcomere is a muscular cell, and those sarcomeres, they can help you to contract and to release. Now, each skeletal muscle is a singular cylindrical muscle cell. So each inside. An individual skeletal muscle might be made up of hundreds or even thousands of muscle fibers that are bundled together and wrapped in a connective tissue covering. So here's a little image of all that complexity that exists within the muscle. The skeletal muscles move when the brain sends signals via the peripheral nervous system. So remember, that's coming from the brain via the nervous system, the nerves that branch out into the body. And then it tells really the muscle to move, to contract, to release. It also gets information back from the muscle and a surrounding area, for example, like pain. A typical muscle is serviced from anywhere between like 50 and 200 or more branches of specialized nerve cells. They're called motor neurons. Motor neurons are responsible for the movement. So how does it work? Here's an example of contracting a bicep. So you can bring your arm out and then contract by bringing the elbow to be bent. This is our hinge joint of the elbow. We bend it, bring the hand up to the shoulder and back. That is contracting the bicep muscle. So how it works, a message travels from the nervous system to the muscular system, triggering chemical reactions. Now, this chemical reaction leads to the muscle fibers reorganizing themselves to shorten. That's contraction. So these muscular cells, they group together, they get lots smaller, and that's how we get this sort of popping up of the muscle. And then when the nervous system signal is no longer present, the chemical process reverses, and then the muscle fibers rearrange themselves, the muscle relaxes. So here we can see the contraction of the bicep by bending and then releasing. But we've also got these two working together, huh? So when we contract the bicep, the tricep is released. You can kind of feel, oh yeah, it's released. And then you do the opposite, you extend, and that tricep's a bit more engaged. So strong skeletal muscles, they need to both be able to contract and release. Stretching can help the health of our muscles for sure by increasing flexibility, range of motion, also reducing stiffness. And when we practice yoga, we are always practicing that contraction, that release, that stretching. So yoga is one of the best practices for our muscles to get that contraction or activation, that release, and then active stretching. So that was skeletal muscle. So those ones that are like the biceps and the muscles in the body that your brain sends a signal to contract or release. But we've also got smooth muscle, and that's of our organs. So the intestines, the stomach, the airways of the lung, like the tracheal and the bronchioles, the uterus, the bladder, and then also blood vessels like arteries. So another common term for smooth muscle is involuntary muscle. So, and that's because the motion of smooth muscle happens without conscious awareness. So this is different. With our skeletal muscle, the muscles that are striated have those little stripes, like our biceps. They happen within conscious awareness. So there's constantly signals going between the brain and the rest of the body via that peripheral nervous system to contract or release. But smooth muscle, thank goodness, does not need that constant communication. It's just going to work on its own. And then cardiac muscle, it's really just the heart. So it's specific to the heart. And it also, thank goodness, contracts and relaxes without our conscious awareness. So we don't have to think about it in order for it to move. Okay, so that's muscle. The last thing we'll go over, and I have also for your learning an additional video that goes over fascia in a lot more detail. And this is fascia, what we're going to talk about next. So there's been so much advancement in the world of science looking at fascia. Over the last 20 years, it's pretty actually amazing. And the very cool thing for us to know as yoga teachers is everything we do in yoga helps the health of the fascia. So here's what the fascia is. It's a thin casing of connective tissue that surrounds and holds every organ, every blood vessel, every bone, every nerve fiber, and every muscle in place. So the tissue does more than provide internal structure. It also has nerves, so it makes it almost as sensitive as the skin. So here we go. Here's fascia. We've got artery, we've got nerve there. So it's stringy white substance made mostly of collagen. It's soft, it's loose, and it's made up of multiple layers. You can see here the multiple layers. So there's a liquid called hyaluron, and that's between each layer. And it helps your fascia stretch as you move. So it's like kind of lubrication for your fascia. Scientists initially thought fascia only provided support to your organs, your muscles, and your bones. And in fact, when they were taking apart cadavers to do anatomy labs, to look a little deeper at what is this muscle, what is this organ, they would just scrape the fascia off. They kind of thought that it was just like garbage. But we now know that fascia is a part of a system-wide network, and that provides form, function to every part of your body. It's a continuous layer of tissue that's flexible and able to resist tension. So although it looks like a single tissue, it's actually made up of many, many layers, and it's made to stretch when you move. When your fascia tightens, so for example, if you don't move for a while, it can restrict the movement of your muscles and tissue, causing pain. I mean, even think about when you wake up in the morning, because you haven't moved that much when you've been sleeping, and you get a little stiff or you feel a little stiff, and you might then get up and do like a big stretch or a little back bend. Pets do this beautifully. If you watch a cat or a dog get up after a little nap, they will always go into stretches like our down dog, our up dog, as we know in yoga. What they're doing is they're releasing their fascia. So they're allowing their fascia to move to release stiffness in the body. On the opposite side, inflammation or trauma can dry up this hyaluron and damage the fascia. So if you've had an injury, you'll get fascia first rush to the site of the injury to protect it. But if we don't move that area after a while, it'll just stay real sticky around there. So it's really important for us to continually move different parts of the body. So like the tendons, like the ligaments, fascia is made up mostly of collagen, but it's a different type of tissue. So the tendons, they connect the muscles to bones mostly, and ligaments connect the bones to bones mostly. But the fascia is distinct because it wraps around all the muscles and all the body parts. You can even imagine like an orange, if you peel an orange and then you can get those little sections, think like a mandarin orange. But then if you open up that little section, within it is each little juicy bit that's also wrapped in something. That's kind of like fascia. So it used to be thought, remembering this again, that fascia just covered the organs, the muscles, and the bones, but now we know that it surrounds all of our cells, all of our nerves, joints, tendons, and ligaments in the body. So we actually think of fascia now almost as another system or another organ in itself. Now, when it's healthy, it's flexible, it stretches with you. Here we have somebody jumping rope. She's got great fascia moving around. But here, if you spend a lot of time in that chair, think he's got a remote control in one hand. It'll restrict movement and it'll cause painful health conditions. So that's why we encourage movement in yoga and why it's so important to adapt our yoga practice for clients to make it so that they can move, even if it's just a little bit of movement. The fascia is a huge part of that. So yoga asana, it keeps the fascia hydrated and moving really smoothly. And flowing movements are particularly helpful for keeping that fascia flexible and smooth. So almost all of our flowing movements you can think of, here, let's just stop my share so we can see. So for example, flowing movements like in a sun salutation, you reach your arms up over the head and then you dive forward, you hinge at your hips. Inhale up part way, come back up, and then come all the way up. Just that movement, so great for the fascia of the shoulders, so great for the spine. You can think of other flowing movement that we might do. If we come back into table and do cat-cow or chakra, bakasana, spinal waves, we're also releasing fascia. So any flowing movement, we maybe sit and we go from side to side with the arms, that flowing movement, any flowing movement at all in your body helps to release fascia. And that's why yoga can be so, so helpful for reducing pain, for increasing mobility, and also for balancing that with stability. So that's the end of this lesson, the overview of anatomy. The next lessons that we do will be on specific areas of the body and specific systems of the body.